So good afternoon. I'm Ian Hojnicki. I'm in the user interface group. And today I'm going to talk briefly about how you can work with documents on the cloud, specifically focusing on working with them inside of the desktop products, either Mathematica or Wolfram Desktop. Just as a quick tour, we're going to talk about what's currently there interface-wise. We're going to talk briefly about what kind of notebook functions are aware of cloud objects, and then the real meat of this talk is actually going to be about what's coming. So much like most cloud-enabled applications, the most common way that you actually end up interacting with them is actually opening, modifying, and then saving content directly back to it. And the simplest form of that, of course, is the generic old-fashioned open and save dialog, which we have for the cloud if you've never seen it. It supports login. We have login support in the product, and they're located right there. The open and save dialog are themed to match the cloud styling, but the usage patterns are the same. We don't do a whole lot of maintenance, so there's no, like, oh, I want to rename files inside of it. We're not trying to replicate Finder or Explorer inside of our product. Originally, we tried it and decided that it was a little bit of overkill. If you're interested in seeing that happen in the future, I'd be interested in hearing about that afterwards. But the only thing that is truly useful is for being able to modify your cloud storage directly is we give you the ability to save, in the save dialog, we give you the ability to create a new folder. The real interesting bit, though, is the activity monitor. Oh, actually, I'll leave that there. That's actually fortuitous. The activity monitor, all the interactions that the front end has with the cloud happens asynchronously in a queue. So whenever you go to open a document or save content back to the cloud, it actually happens off of a queue, so it can happen on a somewhat maintainable schedule without overloading, for instance, your own network connection. Or, if everybody decided to save the exact same thing at the same time, then we don't take the cloud down with it as well. It's also the place where, as you can see, it actually ends up reporting errors. So that way you can actually maintain, you can indicate to the system what you're trying, what you would like to do here, either trying again in this instance, or you can actually abort it. I took the bold step. We're going to try it. Maybe it was because I turned it off earlier. The interesting bit about this is that on Windows and Linux, in version 10, we actually shut the application down when you've closed all of your windows. But if this is still syncing, that would actually end up in terminating the process in the middle, so you would never have your data finished uploading. So the Cloud Activity Monitor basically is there to keep the system going, to allow the data to continue to upload and finish out. Otherwise, it ends up having a very odd experience of you thought you saved it, you shut your laptop, you come and use it on a different machine, and then all of a sudden all your data isn't there anymore. So from interface perspective, it's pretty standard. From a UI point of view, inside the document, we just added a few bit of error handling messaging. It lets you know that the front end knows that if you have active internet connections, and it will let you know that it's impossible to save documents because you lack internet connectivity. It also report errors in that place as well. And we have this cute little bubble at the bottom just to let you know that saves are pending off in the background as well, in case you don't have the activity monitor around. But the real interesting stuff is actually the notebook functions in the language that we can use with cloud objects. So the obvious one, of course, is notebook open. given an arbitrary cloud object, you can actually directly open the notebook in the front end, modify it to your heart's content. You can then actually call notebook save on that notebook object, and it will then send it back. But as I mentioned, it is asynchronous, which means that the data itself will not be sent to the server by the time the function is finished. That's something to be aware of. And we didn't have the two-argument form in 10. For notebook information, we made a few tweaks along the way. We added 2 new fields to the result. One is basically storage class, which describes whether or not the notebook is backed locally on your file system or in the cloud. And if it's a cloud-based object, it, of course, has a URI field that lets you know the cloud object that's actually backing it. But that's what we currently have, which is admittedly a little on the thin. And so for some of the stuff that we're doing in the future, as I mentioned, we did saving being asynchronous is probably one of the more difficult things to work with, I acknowledge. With the biggest problem just being, how do I know when it's even done? So we added, interesting line wrapping. So we added a current value that will actually tell you the status of the queue. This will, basically, you can query the system to find out if there's any tasks running in general. You can find out specifically if there's any open tasks or any particular save tasks. And then you can also filter this not only on, as globally, but also for a particular notebook. So for instance, kind of the idea behind this is I have an application that I built in a document that basically goes through and generates a whole bunch of other things. And it's putting all those other things up to the cloud. You can actually have UI in your document that actually indicates, hey, I'm generating these and now I'm saving them off in the background. And you can do that. Relatively simply. Here's just a quick little dirty demo that I put together. It's just basically opening one that's already there, resaving it, and then it's going to sit there and show you the state of the notebook in progress as it's saving. So that's how you can programmatically indicate the status of any document that you happen to be generating. We also added a way so you can actually tell if actually you can tell with notebook information, but this is an easier way to tell to be able to query for this in interfaces. The first thing that I thought of that we would possibly use this for is if we had something like a properties field, or like tab or palette or whatever you wanted to call it for a particular notebook. If it was written in high level, what we would want to do is we would want to know, if this is a cloud-based notebook, we would end up showing metadata A, B, C, D. If it is a if it's a notebook that's backed in the file system, we would show metadata E, F, G. It's useful if you're actually trying to build applications that are going to handle differently depending on where the source and the destination are going to be. There's a quick little example for it. As you can see, this one's actually stored locally, just in case my network didn't work. But the real crux was dealing with that thing that I kind of hand waved around a little bit earlier, which was the two-argument form of notebook save, which is arguably, in a system where we pride ourselves in being able to generate documents in a programmatic fashion. Our documentation build system is done this way. To have an asynchronous function is exceedingly difficult to work with. So notebook save, we're extending it so that it works with the two-argument form, so you can actually specify a cloud object as the destination, and it works synchronously. So you're guaranteed that the data is actually going to be there. It's just infinitely easier to work with it that way. And once, of course, you are doing saving, the next obvious, in document generation, the next obvious bit that you want to think about is normally you want to end up deploying it. You don't normally create this content and then just let it sit there. This normally goes someplace else. So we extended CDF deploy. This can now target the cloud directly. You could do this in 10. It's just ugly. I wrote this, when I wrote that, I was like, ew. And so now it's a little easy, it's a little more straightforward, a little more concise to actually see what's going on. The nice thing, we haven't decided to make to set the permissions for cloud objects in deploy because it's just too, I think it's a little too, what's the right word for it? I don't think it's the right decision to just carte blanche set permissions against it of any one type. So instead, that's done manually still. But the nice thing is that you can just deploy what you were deploying before. You can actually just target it straight to the cloud and avoid this whole entire nonsense of copying files and deleting temporaries, which is just kind of a pain to work with. I think what I don't want to do is I don't want to have it have a default of, it would be, I'm just assuming that it's going to be public. It could be there. It could set it, but then, it would just be whatever you specify, and if not, it's left private, and the default is, I think, more along the line of what I would go for. This is very much still ebb and flow. So if there's things that along the way that that you think would be, it's in the cloud storage, yeah, but it's just private for you. You don't rewrite the whole. You're not rewriting the whole thing. It's a separate transaction, yes, yeah. I think even internally that would be I think the REST service in and of by itself, I think that's 2 steps. So that's deploy. So okay, so we have a whole bunch of content that's on the web, that's up on the cloud. Normally you want a link to it of some type. So a couple of the extensions that we're making for this. The obvious thing, we had notebook open, but notebook locate didn't work, so that was extended. Notebook locate is actually the function that basically powers the documentation system. So you can have that jump straight to a cloud object. And then, of course, once you have notebook locate, hyperlink is basically built on top of it. So hyperlink was an obvious extension. One of the interesting things about hyperlink is, we have this set up, and if you give it a cloud object, it actually goes to the web version of it. I'm not actually convinced yet that that's the right behavior for them. But, maybe that will change, maybe that won't. Maybe that becomes optional. It can go to 2 different places, who knows. I'd be interested to know what you think about it. And then, of course, there was a few other, a few people internally even that were asking about how to use cloud objects with system open. And that was pretty obvious because the response was always, well, just do first of cloud object and then give it to system open. And normally diving into objects leads to code that's not going to last over time due to version changes. So we extended system open to at least do the right thing. And that will open in whatever web browser you happen to have selected on the machine. So that, that's great. That's, but this is all like stuff that's in the product itself and it goes out. The really interesting bit is I have it on the cloud somewhere and I want someone to get to it. So the real interesting bit is this new URL custom protocol that we have for it. Mathematica and Wolfram Desktop both register for this. And basically how this works is that you have the URL for a cloud object. And you basically rip the HTTPS off of it. And then you give it this Wolfram plus cloud object thing. And what this lets you do, basically, is you can send someone, for instance, an email, right? And go, hey, I have this document that I just deployed earlier, and it's public, so you don't even, anybody can look at it. Here is the web address, right? But you can also do, you can also do, not only is there this web address, but here's this other address too. And if you do that, here's an example. If I hit this one is just going to open it in place. Well, maybe, depending on if my network is going to work or not. It says it's working, but it ain't going anywhere. That makes for a really bad demo, but this will work. This is what happens when you click on the link that has the Wolfram plus cloud object URL protocol at the front. Instead, this will actually open directly in the product if they have it installed. No, go and open this thing, go into this web page and download this file and then open it, open your app and then, and then remember where you saved it on disk. This is just, click the link, hit allow. This probably won't download. For some odd reason, we're just not going to be happy. That's unfortunate. It finally did. So it opened directly. No asking, no questions, just go. Which I think is actually really useful. I think it's so useful, I've actually debated internally myself of just having a way for regular notebooks to work this way. Just because it's so useful. But it's so obvious to just download, go save as. But for cloud objects in this structure, this thing is really nice and easy to use. And you can use it yourself. You can put it up on internal web pages, so you have large documents that you're sharing with lots of people. You can have basically a catalog of all of these things, and you can just go bang, 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 and you can choose which way you want to view it. If you want to view it in a web browser, great. You want to view it in Mathematica, great. You want to view it potentially in the Wolfram Cloud app on your iPad, great. No big deal. It just all works across the board. Okay. That was basically the gist of the extensions that we're making so far in a coming update. I wanted to take a few minutes here and just mention really quickly some interesting talks dealing with basically authoring content, working with the cloud, and CDF in general. These are all interesting talks. If you haven't seen them before, I recommend going to see them. And are there any questions at all?